All right. Good afternoon again, and thank you for joining us today for the release of The Methanol Industry at a Crossroads, a Volatile Chemicals Volatile Future, the latest report from the Ohio River Valley Institute. My name is Ben Hunkler. I am the communications manager at the Ohio River Valley Institute, and our organization is a nonpartisan regional think tank focused on equipping our region's residents and decision makers with the policy research and the practical tools that they need to advance long-term solutions to some of Appalachia's most significant challenges. We're joined today by report author and Orvie Research Fellow Zane Gustafson, who will shortly walk us through the report, presenting on the growth of the U.S. methanol industry and the forces complicating the industry's accelerating North American expansion plans. And a couple quick notes before we get started. First, today's webinar is being recorded. Secondly, we've enabled closed captioning, which should be available to you at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, if you have any questions, thoughts, or comments on today's presentation, please feel free to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A box at any time. We've reserved some time at the end of today's program for Q&A and discussion. We will also send around a link to the webinar recording, a copy of today's slide deck, and a link to both the report and a summary and digital toolkit later this afternoon. Please send me a chat if you need anything, and otherwise, Zane, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ben. I'm just going to share my screen real quick and we can get started.
Cool.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to share this report and the work of the past few months on digging into the methanol industry. And so without further ado, I'll just get started. Let's start with what is methanol? So some methanol 101. Methanol is a key in-between petrochemical, and this is what its chemical compound looks like. And because it's an in-between chemical, data on it is actually quite difficult to find because it's either the end product or the gas and coal that are used to produce it, as opposed to data on methanol itself. So it was a bit tricky to get some of this data on the industry. But this is what methanol looks like. It's because it's very simple chemically, it can be used to produce lots of things, which is why it's such a key in between petrochemical for the industry. And so what is it used for? It is used everywhere. On the right, you have a pie chart of the different things that methanol is converted into, which we don't need to go into the chemistry on that, but you can just see that there are multiple different functions that products that it produces, different chemicals it produces. And on the left, some key things about what it is used to produce. The methanol to olefins are another petrochemical, is a key function. And then from olefins, it is used to produce food packaging, tile and flooring, antifreeze, detergents, tires, plastic gloves, just a bunch of different consumer products. And then the other key piece is methanol to propylene, which are plastics, basically. And it's used to produce lots and lots and lots of other things. For example, it is used to produce fertilizers, plastics, pharmaceutical products, TV screens, and mobile phones. It's also used as fuels, or you can use it as fuels, and it's blended into fuels. It's just used all over the place. The other piece is it's in a lot of consumer products, which we use every day in your house, in your kitchen, in your bathroom, in your car, in hospitals. It's just a really long list of different consumer products that methanol is used to produce. And producing methanol is currently very carbon intensive. Globally, about 60% of methanol is sourced from natural gas, and most of the rest is produced from coal. Obviously, coal is more carbon intensive than natural gas. But here in the US, methanol production is almost 100% from natural gas. And globally, less than 1% of methanol is produced from biomass and green hydrogen. So that's kind of your renewable sources for methanol. And the impacts of methanol production, first of all, it's a toxic chemical. So, spills are not good. But really, the production relies on gas extraction and all of the associated environmental and human health harms from gas extraction, production, transportation, refining, all the things that I'm sure people here are very familiar with. And producing 1 metric ton of methanol from gas, which is what we use in the US, produces 2.1 metric tons of greenhouse gas, just as an example of the global carbon impacts of methanol. So let's take a look at the US methanol industry. This graph shows that US methanol capacity has grown over 15-fold over the last 20 years. So prior to 2011, US methanol capacity was less than 800,000 metric tons per year. And now it is over 12 million metric tons. And you can see kind of the key expansions and plant creations over the past 20 years. The Geismar plant, the Clear Lake plant, the Beaumont plant, the Koch St. James plant. These are huge plants. Almost all of the methanol capacity growth has been in the US Gulf Coast. As you can see here, this is just a breakdown of the years that each facility got started. Only one of them is not on the Gulf Coast, which is the US Methanol Liberty 1 plant in Kanawha County. I hope I pronounced that correctly, in West Virginia, which is actually a relatively small plant. The reason that they put it there is because it's very convenient for transportation logistics, because methanol is transported by vehicle and also train and also barge. So the US currently has 13 million metric tons of capacity, and it produces about 10 million metric tons of methanol per year from that. Somewhere around 75% of production capacity, or production of the capacity, excuse me. And this consumes about 300 billion cubic feet of gas per year. That's about 800,000, 800 million cubic feet per day. Which is about 1% of US total gas consumption. So methanol as a percentage of the entire gas industry isn't huge, but it is still an important factor. And this is equal to the gas consumption of 5.5 million households, which is a lot of people. And so currently methanol production emits 21 million metric tons of greenhouse gas per year. And I want to go back to this chart, and it shows the other line is this blue line, which shows exports. And so you can see that the growth in methanol capacity is not just driven by internal demand, it is also driven by global demand. Another important piece here is that methanol industry expansion has not been without failures. In recent years, over 25 million metric tons of methanol capacity projects have failed. That means of the total that were proposed in the last 15 years, it was about 35, 38 million metric tons. About 2/3 of that capacity did not end up happening. It did not get built. It did not come to fruition. So this is really important to know, that these projects are not guaranteed. In particular, I want to pull your attention to two of the plants that failed. The Northwest Innovation Works methanol plant in Tacoma, Washington, and then the Gulf Coast Methanol Complex in Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana. Each of these individually was going to be over 7 million metric tons, which is just, they each would have been among the largest globally for methanol production, and each of them would on its own nearly double the entire US capacity of methanol production. And they failed for different reasons. First, the plant in Tacoma, Washington failed due to rampant community opposition and a series of lawsuits and basically site fights that ultimately resulted in the company deciding it wasn't worth it to try to continue building there. So, site fights can work. as you're all aware. And then the other one is this the Gulf Coast methanol complex in Louisiana. It was permitted. It actually had its permits, but they didn't begin construction on time. And the company never said exactly why they decided not to build it, but we can read between the lines, and it's clear it was market forces where they were looking at overall methanol supply and demand, and they were like, well, this probably doesn't pencil out to make it worth it for us to build this thing. So through this combination of community opposition and market forces, which I'll get to into in a moment, you know, not all methanol projects are slated for success. So let's talk about the global context, which I've alluded to. So methanol is a global commodity. Um, this chart shows what the global methanol demand has been historically. This chart is from 2023, so up through 2022 is historic, and then beyond that, it's projections according to Argus Media, which is an industry analysis firm. The CTO and CTP, that's coal to olefins, coal to propylene, or it's internal to China. Um, and that is this is a part of the market that is not traded globally, but it is part of the overall methanol demand. So it's included in this chart. But the blue bar represents merchant methanol demand, which is the global commodity. Excuse me. Which is the global methanol market that the US and North American plants are a part of and are competing in. And you can see that overall demand is a little under 100 million metric tons. So, just to give you a sense of the scale of what the US is at, we're a little less than 10% of this market. Yeah. China, on the other hand, accounts for 70% of global demand. It is the absolute leader in global demand, and it's not even close. And that includes the internal coal to olefins and coal to propylene market. For this chart, it's closer to about 50 to 55% is this blue bar, which is China on the top there. And you can see down at the bottom of the chart is the North American market, which is minuscule compared to the Chinese market. So when we're talking about the global growth in methanol demand, in large part, we're talking about China. And why is China doing so much methanol demand? A lot of that is the consumer products and the plastics that I talked about at the beginning. So a really important piece of this is that global production of methanol is currently at about 65% of total capacity. So the total capacity to produce methanol is 145 million metric tons, but globally, we're only producing 100 million metric tons. So there's a ton of spare capacity, unused capacity globally. Again, China has the vast majority, not the vast majority, is the 50% of global capacity, much bigger than any other region. The second largest region is the Middle East, and then LAM is Latin America, and the largest producer there is Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and then North American market is dominated by the US. There are a couple plants smaller plants in Canada and Mexico, and then there's a larger plant that is being proposed in Mexico that I'll talk about in a little bit. So let's talk about the impact of the Iran war, because this affects the methanol industry as well as a variety of other oil and gas sectors, as people are aware. The overall impact of this war is yet unknown. It's very uncertain. It's uncertain, first of all, how long it's going to last. But in the last week, it's currently been escalating, so it's going on for a little bit longer. I want to call attention to one piece is, which is that Iran is one of the world's largest, after China, it's one of the world's largest methanol producers. And at this facility at Asayula, again, forgive me for the pronunciation, which is about 250 miles north of the Strait of Hormuz, they have 13 million metric tons of capacity just in this one area. So that alone is a huge, huge piece of the global market. And there's been reports that oil and gas and petrochemical facilities have been damaged in the course of this war, but the extent of that damage to methanol facilities specifically is unknown. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the extent of damage or whether or not it is even real. Um, so this is a big question mark. But I think the larger point here is that the impact on long-term business decisions in the US of the Iran war is likely fairly small, because for companies to invest billions of dollars in building these plants, they're looking at returns over the course of decades. So, whatever damage is done to these facilities in the Persian Gulf they're likely to be fixed eventually. This war, hopefully, likely won't go on forever. And so eventually things will get back to normal. But it's just a really big question mark. But I did want to bring this up because it is an important point for discussion. And so the US, I showed that export chart earlier. The US is now one of the world's largest methanol exporters. This is data from the World Trade Organization, and it shows that in 2013, the US was exporting 144,000 metric tons per year. We were a net importer overall. Actually, most of our imports were coming from Trinidad and Tobago. But now we are a net exporter, and we are the fourth largest exporter as of 2022. And you can see that we're pretty close to second and third, which is Saudi Arabia and then Trinidad and Tobago. And the largest exporter is Iran, 8.5 million metric tons. And some of the years in this data set were missing data for Iran. So I went back to 2022 to get a good sample size for this chart. But 7.5 million of the 8.5 million metric tons that Iran exports, 7.5 million goes to China. So again, China is kind of the sink in demand for methanol overall. So where does US methanol go? About half of it in 2024 went to the European Union, and a little over 25% went to South Korea. And South Korea acts as a hub for kind of the rest of the Asian market, I think excluding China. And so that's kind of the main places that we are exporting to. We're not really exporting to China. We're looking at other parts of the market. And so going back to the chart showing the growth in capacity and the growth in exports, which have really risen in concert with each other, I want to highlight this Geismar expansion in 2015. Excuse me, the Geismar expansion in 2015. That plant led directly to a huge bump in South Korean exports in 2016. You can see in the blue line that was kind of the first bump in US exports, where we went from a minor player to, all of a sudden we're exporting almost 2 million metric tons of methanol in 2016. A huge portion of that, about 600,000 metric tons, went to South Korea specifically from almost nothing. And that's because Geismar has a storage hub in South Korea. So they were basically moving methanol from the Gulf Coast over to South Korea, and then from there transporting it to their final destinations around Asian markets. So let's look to the future. What's coming down the pipe? Growth projections about the methanol industry are uncertain, regionally and globally. And this is, getting at what I was saying about kind of the opacity of the data and difficulty in finding data. A lot of this is behind paywalls by different industry analysis firms. But what I could find is that a very optimistic firm suggested that North American methanol demand would reach 20 million metric tons by 2034. That would more than double North American methanol demand. On the other hand, I saw a different firm suggested that US methanol demand would reach just a little over 8 million metric tons, up from 7 million currently. And so that's a much, much more modest amount of growth. The US is more than 90% of North American methanol demand. So um, this regional low projection probably would be 9 or 10 million metric tons for North America overall. But sometimes the exact region of the projections is different. So it's a little bit difficult to parse. Globally, growth is also a little bit uncertain, but it's estimated at between 2.7 and 4.3% annually for the next decade, which is basically adding between 3 and 5 million metric tons of demand per year from the about 100 million metric tons of demand. And the key drivers of this demand are the methanol to olefins and methanol to propylene sectors that I discussed earlier, as well as the construction industry. This is a lot of textiles, a lot of plastics, tiling, laminates, all of these things. They use chemicals derived from methanol. So what does that look like for the methanol industry in the US? There's more than 10 million metric tons of proposed new capacity, and this is likely dependent on increased exports. So not just North American demand. Yeah. And so you can see on this chart the different steps, the different years in which these projects are projected to come online. You can see a really big project in 2028, and then a few more in 2030 and later. And this is more capacity than was projected in a 2023 report by Argus, which kind of shows that these projects are being announced and they're accelerating in terms of the proposed new capacity. So where are these projects? They're mostly in the Gulf Coast. There are two in West Virginia, the U.S. Methanol Liberty 2 expansion in Kanawha County again, and then also in Pleasants County. There's another plant proposed there in West Virginia. But mostly we're looking at the Gulf Coast, Texas, and Louisiana. Just 4 projects account for 85% of proposed new capacity in the US. That's the Lake Charles methanol plant that I've highlighted here in red on the right. The Matagorda e-fuels plant in Texas, the Sandpiper blue methanol plant, and then the Southern Energy Renewables Clean Fuels plant in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana. A 5th major project is the Pacifico Mexanol blue methanol plant in Sinaloa, Mexico, which is quite large as well. I want to call out attention to the fact that about half of this new capacity would come from green hydrogen or biomass. And this would be a massive jump in the amount of methanol produced globally from these renewable green sources. We just don't see this at scale anywhere on the globe. So for these plants to come online and then be successful, it would be quite remarkable in my opinion. The other half of capacity is basically all blue methanol. So blue methanol is produced from blue hydrogen. This involves carbon capture and sequestration. So you produce the methanol from gas and then you capture and sequester the emissions. All of these projects are claiming that they will capture and sequester 90+% of the emissions from the production of methanol, and uh, we don't see those CCS rates that have been proven yet at commercial scale. And so, there's a degree of skepticism there in terms of the blue nature of those plants, but they would be consuming gas. And that is a process that is very proven at scale. And I want to call attention to this Methanol plant in Sinaloa because it is outside of the U.S., but it is going to use U.S. gas from the Permian Basin in Texas, 160 million cubic feet per day of Texas gas as feedstock. And so, you can see that the U.S. Methanol industry, it really is the North American methanol industry. It's just using U.S. gas. And so, that is designed to reach Asian markets, right? Sinaloa is on the west coast of Mexico. It's a great way to cut down the time that it takes to transport methanol to the Western Pacific and the Asian markets. So like I want to kind of conclude with hope and some skepticism about these projects and kind of explain why certainly not all of these projects are going to be built. Some of them probably will, but some of them definitely will not. And so, number one is that the current global capacity far exceeds current production and demand. So, theoretically, not even theoretically, if demand rises, there is already enough capacity around the globe to meet that demand for quite some time. As I said earlier, globally, we're at 65% uh, production capacity. So there's a large amount of unused capacity that can be tapped to meet any demand growth. So that's number one. Along with that, global demand just may not rise fast enough to justify major new projects, which is what we saw in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, with that project that got permitted, but the company decided, nah, we don't want to do it. A third reason to doubt the viability of this is that production costs of methanol may rise due to rising gas prices from increased gas demand, right? I'm sure everyone is aware of data centers and the build out there and the impact that that is having on the cost of electricity, but also the cost of gas, because that is often where the data centers are getting their electricity from. Similarly, there's rising gas exports as the US continues to export more and more gas around the globe. And so that all of that increases demand, which may increase prices, which then increases the production cost of methanol, making it potentially less viable for these plants. A fourth reason is that half of this new capacity is dependent on biomass or green hydrogen, which I've already talked about. And it, I think just a healthy degree of skepticism there is warranted for these projects that are using technologies that haven't been proven on commercial scale. And particularly green hydrogen uses a lot of electricity and is, well, there are other reports on Orvi's website about green hydrogen that you can check out that go deeper into that. And then the fifth reason is, advocates challenging these projects and putting up site fights and making it difficult for these companies to build the projects. Delay, delay, delay. Those can be successful. We saw that was successful in Tacoma, Washington, with that massive 7 million plus capacity plant. So I want to just end on a positive note in that way. And that is what I have for you today. There's a lot of uncertainty. Thank you for listening, and I'm excited to see your questions and have a bit of discussion about this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zane. Yeah, again, we welcome questions in the chat or the Q&A box. And thank you to Cynthia who passed along more information on the South Louisiana methanol project in St. James Parish that was canceled in 2022. There is a link to a great article on the community opposition to that facility, as well as Earth Justice's press release in the chat. Um, but on that note, Zane, we're joined today by a number of community advocates and organizers, some of whom may have worked to fight methanol buildout in their own communities. Could you share a little bit about what community members in the crosshairs of methanol expansion should take away from this research?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really what that closing note was, which
Right.
is there's a lot of hope here,
Hmm.
and that whatever you're doing in your community, in your county, in your parish, you're actually being helped by global market forces that are making it more difficult in a lot of ways for these methanol plants to be viable, just from a pure economic financial perspective, which is really what these companies care about. As we all know, they don't really care about the impact on human health at all. So um, I think, you know, maybe even highlighting that to them could be helpful. It's kind of a would be kind of a trolly way to do it, but it could be effective.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another quick question about the takeaways on your final slide, Zane. To what degree do you think we will see this growing demand met by the untapped current capacity worldwide? And why are there so many new projects if there's so much existing unused production infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, Frankly, I don't understand why they're building so many new projects when there's so much unused capacity.
Hmm.
That is a bit of a mystery to me. I do think the impact of the Iran war, it could be impactful in this way, where
Hmm.
a good amount of the production capacity is in the Middle East. And so theoretically, you could see a world in which a lot of that production capacity is damaged or destroyed, and it takes a few years to come back online.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if that's likely, but in that case, I think it would make it more likely in the short term to build these projects. But even in that case, these plants are going to come back online, and it's it's cheaper to fix something than it is to build an entirely new plant.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a bit of a tricky thing. And this gets back to what I mentioned at the start of the
Hmm.
presentation, which is the difficulty of finding good data on this.
Sure.
It's quite tricky.
Is there anything you'd like to share about how you found these data sources and what sorts of resources you consulted in putting together this project?
Yeah, I used a lot of stuff from the methanol industry. So Argus
Mhm.
Media works with the Methanol Institute, which is, they're trying to increase methanol everywhere. Um, and so I was really just using their public facing research, which they're trying to hype up the possibility of methanol production and methanol capacity and methanol use. Um, I also used the best data that I was able to find was from the World Trade Organization on just import and export data. And that was really useful to see exactly the amount that is actually produced, because the estimate of the US producing about 10 million metric tons, that is an estimate because we don't have hard data on that. It doesn't exist on the EIA, which is
Oh,
the
wow.
US Energy Information Associate Administration. And so we just know the capacity and we know the exports, and then we know somewhat what we are demanding as well in
Mhm.
the US. And so from there, you can kind of estimate that it's about 10 million metric tons. But seeing the import export data was really, really useful to have a hard number as a benchmark from which to base everything off of.
Mhm. Gotcha. Again, we will share a link to the report. Actually, I'll just do that right now, as well as a recording of today's webinar, a copy of Zane's slide deck, and we also have a summary and a digital toolkit that breaks down some of the key findings of today's research, which we will share after the call. We've got a question from Miriam who asks about the connection between these new projects and initiatives aiming to decarbonize chemical production.
It's a great question. I think that that's definitely getting at the biomass and the green hydrogen
Hmm.
pieces of this. And for those, I really want to emphasize that my skepticism about those projects is that we just haven't seen them yet. Um, I would love to see chemical processes decarbonized. Like that would be great in my view. And a world in which green hydrogen is possible and cheap, that would be great. I just don't know if we're there yet for those processes. Um, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a fuller answer for you there.
Zane, you've also written extensively and recently on the ammonia industry and ammonia industry trends, which are also, hydrogen reliant. Do you see any intersection between the global trends in the methanol industry and those you wrote about previously in the ammonia industry?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of hype in both of
Hmm.
these where some of the projections for demand are, I think they're far too high to be taken seriously. But, there is a grain of truth there where it's like, oh yeah, you can use these things, these ammonia and methanol. There are a ton of different end uses for them, and that's real. And so the possibility is definitely there. I view this really as the gas industry and the petrochemical industry. They're obviously they're very tied hand in hand, but they're just looking for anything to continue making money and continue going on, because they know that decarbonization is going to happen.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of when. But we know that it's going to happen, and we know that it has to happen. So I view these attempts as just trying to delay the inevitable.
Absolutely. Yeah, our organization has written extensively on what our researcher Sean O'Leary likes to call the next shiny object of the gas industry. They keep pivoting from the fracking boom to the ethane storage hub to the hydrogen hub to now methanol, ammonia, data centers, looking for new markets for natural gas. I'll drop another link here to some other research on that subject if anyone's curious. Cool. And yeah, if any questions occur to you all later, please feel free to get in touch with us. I can drop my email in chat, and I'm happy to forward any comments, questions, inquiries onto Zane and to our research team. But we really appreciate you joining us today for the release of Zane's latest research. Again, we'll send around recording, slide deck materials later this afternoon. But thanks again for being here today, and hope you have a good one. And thank you, Zane.
And
Cool. Take care, y'all.